Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the latest installment of the TAP Network Conversations video series. I have the pleasure of having our colleagues from the International Budget Partnership, very close TAP partners over the years, has been a member and a partner of the TAP Network since the very beginning. So welcome to our colleagues. We have with us today, we have Claire Schouten from the IBP International Secretariat. We have Aminata Touli Fall from International Budget Partnership in Senegal. And we have Moussa Tiare from the Secretary General of the Senegalese Federation of Associations of People with Disabilities. Colleagues joining us, again, working at the global level and working at the national level to help us unpack some of the great work that IBP and its partners are doing. So let's give an opportunity for each of you to introduce yourselves just very briefly. Maybe I'll start with you, Claire.
Great, thanks so much, John. It's great to connect with you, and thanks for this opportunity. Claire Schouten, Senior Program Officer with International Budget Partnership, and working very closely with our teams at the international and country level to advance budget transparency, accountability, and participation. Thanks.
Great, thanks again for joining us, Claire. Aminata, please.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity. I'm Aminata Fall. I work with IBP Senegal, and we work with vulnerable groups and mainly people with disabilities and residents of informal settlements. So working towards advocating for their increased access to basic social services. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot. Welcome, Aminata. And Moussa, please.
Hi, John. Hi, everybody. Moussa Tiare, as you said a while ago, Secretary General of the Umbrella Organization of Persons with Disability, mainly focusing on the rights and the protection, the promotion and the protection of the rights of persons with disabilities in Senegal.
Great. Thanks to all of you for joining us. I think, when I think many colleagues may know the work of the International Budget Partnership, but I think, instead of me introducing your work on my end, I think it would be great for you to share a little bit about the work that you do at the global level. So maybe Claire, if you can give us a little bit of a breakdown of the work that you've been doing, especially in light of the current situation with the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we'll give a chance to Aminata and Moussa to detail some of that work in Senegal. But maybe Claire, if you can maybe detail a little bit about the work that IBP does at the global level around the SDGs, how it's relevant to SDG 16 plus and in the COVID-19 context. So Claire.
Great, thanks so much, John. So IBP, the International Budget Partnership, we work with diverse stakeholders, civil society, governments, supreme audit institutions, private sector, and international financial institutions to empower citizens in open and inclusive budget processes to shape policies and practices that promote equity and justice on a sustainable basis. And we've been working at the global level through a variety of ways. One of our flagship programs is the Open Budget Survey, where we work with partners in 120 countries to assess and advocate for transparency, public participation, and oversight in the budget process. And we drew on the Open Budget Survey to advocate for transparency, accountability, and participation in the SDGs. So in collaboration with TAP and many other colleagues, looking at how we can shape a more open, inclusive agenda and looking at how resources are raised, including taxes and debt, allocated and spent towards development outcomes. And that remains the core of our work. We also work on issues of tax equity, on supporting civil society capacity, and of course, research and advocacy at the country level as well to support this agenda.
Great, thanks, Claire. And as you mentioned, IBP has many partners in countries all around the world. I think the case we're looking at today is Senegal. So Aminata, if you can give us a little bit of the background in the work that you do in country, and maybe how it contributes a little bit to the work of IBP overall.
Thanks, John. So at IBP Senegal, we are implementing the SPARK program. It's strengthening public accountability for results and knowledge. And the SPARK program really aims at improving the lives of people through budget advocacy and ensuring the inclusion of vulnerable groups in public policy. So in Senegal, we work mainly with two groups, the National Federation of People with Disabilities and an organization called Urbacent FSH that gathers informal settlement residents and working around sanitation, access to housing and basic social services. But disability really is one of the areas that we work a lot on, and it's advocating for people with disabilities increased access to basic social services, mainly health and education that they're entitled to, and also trying to just mainstream disability in public policy and social programs. In Senegal, people with disabilities have been ignored for a long time. So now we're trying to make sure that they're included not only in public policies, but across social programs, and just trying to deconstruct the norms and the discourse around disability, as it's also really seen from a medical perspective, but we want people with disabilities to be seen as active members of society. So increasing their access to decision-making spaces, engaging with government, building coalitions around disability issues, also trying to propel the conversation on disability through media activities. So I'll keep it at that for now, and then we can dig deeper into it. Thank you.
Sure, great. Thanks a lot, Aminata. And Musa, from your end, if you can detail a little bit of the work that your organization and network does, and how it relates to the work that IBP does, with Aminata and at the global level with Claire.
Thank you, John. Yes, first of all, I would like to mention that IBP is a key partner for the Federation of Persons with Disability in Senegal. And we started very high with the pandemic in terms of collecting information related to the participation of persons with disability. Because as you may know, this pandemic has been a kind of amplifying or magnifying glass for inequalities, and particularly for persons with disabilities. So two main things, or three even, I think Aminata has talked about coalition building. I think that thing was very important because together with other partners in civil society, like mass media or civil society organization dealing with democracy or local developments, we emphasize a lot the inclusion of persons with disability during this pandemic in terms of promoting their rights, but also in terms of acceding to resources. For instance, I know that in terms of accompanying lower income families, persons with disabilities benefit from the state, the government, something like 100,000 assistance, food or something like that during the pandemic. But also something which is very important is how now persons with disabilities are influencing the processes because of the new approach in terms of budget from the local to the national level. That is, IBP is building capacities for persons with disability in terms of better understanding the processes resulting in budgets and so. And this have been of very paramount importance for us. Yes, something also very important is during the pandemic, we have set a mechanism to collect information from the local level to the national level, and so as to better analyze the implications, the involvement of persons with disabilities in the local processes. And this mainly resulted in an inclusion of processes in terms of building transactions, and making society in Senegal more and more inclusive. Something also that is very important during that pandemic is most of the time persons with disabilities were just say left behind in a way, and due to those actions, this mechanism we set, the campaign, I mean mass media campaign, we also organized together with other partners. We made the public authorities, change their initial direction in terms of including persons with disabilities.
Great, thanks a lot, Musa. And you know, we've seen obviously Musa mentioned the value and the work that IBP does to empower local actors, including persons with disabilities, to engage in budget processes. But Claire, I'm wondering, from the global perspective, from IBP's overall work, I mean, engaging with budgets, I think, is often this very nebulous concept. And I think sometimes, for civil society colleagues, we often, there are people that often say that, it's difficult or impossible to measure political will. And I think there are many ways to do it, but I think one of them is through budgets. If a government is serious about a certain topic, they a good measure of how serious they are is how much public funding they dedicate to addressing those issues. So I'm curious, from the IBP global perspective, what's your approach to empowering these local actors, like Musa had mentioned? What's your approach to bring this more nebulous concept of engaging in budgetary processes, and how do you bring it to colleagues to simplify it? How do you bring people to work with them? I'm just curious about your overall approach on how you work with those local and national actors to engage in these processes.
Thanks, John. So a few points there. I mean, we think, first of all, it's important that governments are very open about the resources they're raising and allocating and spending. And we want to make sure that they're keeping their promises. And that's where civil society also has an important role to play. So we're asking governments to be open, to share those reports, to share the information that they're using to make decisions and put it in the public domain. There's some easy ways that governments can do that, simply by putting on their official website the information that they're already producing. That could in itself lead to 20% gains in transparency. The other aspect is explain what you're doing. We understand that shifts in budgets, deviations are going to happen. They're not always bad, but tell us why they're happening. Show us what the trade-offs are. Tell us about the decision-making process. And so we're looking at what's called budget credibility, looking at the extent to which governments are implementing their budgets as approved. And so Musa was highlighting, and Aminata, they were highlighting the allocation for 100,000 households in Senegal for priority assistance that's needed for these communities. And now we're checking to make sure that those allocations are delivered. the other aspect is engage people in the process. So yes, budgets can be seen as technical elements, but they're also the most powerful economic tool, powerful social tool, powerful moral tool to show what a country's priorities are and to make sure that there are resources behind it. So we have a role to play in being an infomediary in a way. So making sure that the complex technical information that's out there is presented and clarified and used by civil society, by the citizens who should be benefiting from those resources. So we have a role to play there. And that's where our colleagues like Aminata are working with colleagues and our partners around the world to ensure that we have the opportunities, that we have the skills, and that we have the information to ensure that those resources deliver for the people. So these are the different ways that we're playing our role, that we're also bringing the stories of people who should be benefiting from these resources to the international space. And that's where partners like TAP, and we have an important role to play to ensure that we have more voices in this debate, more voices in these national discussions and at the global level to hold powerful leaders to account.
Great, thanks a lot, Claire. Aminata, I mean, turning to you now, Claire just detailed, the overall approach, but I'm curious from your perspective, specifically in Senegal. I mean, what's your approach to bringing colleagues from local and grassroots communities? How do you engage with colleagues, beyond just the big international NGOs, for example? We know that some of these bigger NGOs have the capability of engaging in budget processes and have, strong connections with governments and individuals, in these processes. But to give us a little bit of detail on how you expand the scope of, colleagues from civil society or local communities. How do you engage them in the budgetary process?
Thanks, John. I think it's sort of a long process, right? So there are different steps. And I think the first critical step is really trying to, what we call in the Spark program, build the agency of the groups. So reinforce their capacities to first understand budget processes, understand the budget calendar, know how to conduct budget advocacy. Those are really critical steps. We're also trying to understand the group. What's the dynamic of the group? So we work with large federations that have different associations, a wide range of disability types. It's really important to understand first the group and also try to understand the political, economic context, right? So trying to adapt our advocacy strategy to what's happening and not try to make too many assumptions about government action. And what I mean by that is that sometimes we really sort of assume that government is not really interested in improving the lives of specific groups. But in some countries, such in Senegal, in the COVID context, we realized that the government was just really overwhelmed because of the lack of structure in public policy and the limited resources. So instead of just doing mass media campaigns, before we even did that, we collected evidence on the structural exclusion of people with disabilities in public policy. After we collected that evidence through our monitoring mechanism, we engaged with the government, sending letters, doing meetings, and just telling them, okay, so you have forgotten a very important part of the population in the process of allocating funds for the resilience program. And we realized that the government was very open and receptive because we gave them evidence that they didn't really have. So collecting evidence is very important, but also trying to increase the participation of people with disabilities to decision-making processes. So at the local, at the regional, at the national levels, making sure that they engage with state authorities, build coalitions with grassroots organizations, other civil society actors, and just try to constitute a critical mass that is capable of shifting outcomes. And also really using the power of media, right? Documenting the vulnerability of people with disabilities, telling them these are the different aspects of their exclusion that we didn't really take into consideration. Also making sure that we see people with disabilities are not a separate group, but part of active members of society, like I said earlier. And this was really successful. Like my partner Musa said, we were able to secure more than 100,000 COVID relief kits for people with disabilities, and also just try to sustain engagement with government. They're often so busy trying to fix structural issues, that we have to make sure that the group is always engaging with them, always bringing new evidence, always just trying to adapt their strategy. So collaborating with the government, but also holding them accountable. So when they don't deliver results, using press conferences, social media, just try to influence public opinion. Yeah.
Great, thanks a lot, Aminata. And to you, Musa, thinking about the great example that you had mentioned previously, I'm curious about what your approach was. How did you first bring together your network of people with disabilities? How did you come to an agreement? Network building is always a challenge, I think, regardless of whatever level we operate in. So how did you mobilize your own partners? How did you come to a consensus on where the priorities needed to be? And then from there, what were some of the challenges or successes that you had in engaging with the government from there? I mean, what led to the success of your advocacy? From the beginning, the mobilization part of things, through the engaging with the government side of things. So just some reflections on why you think you were successful in that process.
Yes, thank you, John. First of all, I would say that it is just hard work. It's a long process to bring all of these organizations together. But I must say that our organization, I mean, the umbrella organization is has been founded since 1997, so it's long ago. And it was under the aegis of the main authority of this country, who were longing for a federation, that is to gather all organizations of disabled persons. So that was how shall I put it, the core and the heart of our organization. From that, it was very easy for us to, because as you know, in Senegal, we have 14 regions. And region or province, it depends on, but here we say region. So what we try to do is to organize from the national level, to organize in each region person with disability to be a kind of branch of our organization. And in so doing, we have in each region representative organization of our main organization. And in that way, we cover all the country, and we have representative at all levels. That is one thing. And from that, you will see that authority will have a look on what you are doing, in a sense that it's rather a kind of force. If as persons with disabilities we are really organized, we can make proposals to improve our being. The other thing also is it's important. It was important for us to understand that we are not apart from societies. We are in a society that is having different components. So there is a need for us to be aware of the importance of the other component of the society. And this is the reason why it was very important for us to build a coalition, to try and see who can be helpful for us. What can we give in return to other people so as to improve their lives and at the same time improve ours? And then it was very easy from that to make things move forwards, because what we had just to do next was to try and define our priorities from the the living conditions of persons with disabilities, you can easily see that if we are having, for instance, very low number of students, for instance, in universities, it is rather due to the fact that at the lower level, I mean, in primary schools, persons with disabilities did not have access. And it is the same in other sectors. If in healthcare, for instance, persons with disabilities find it difficult to get access to services, it's mainly due to the fact that those structures, those services are not adapted to persons with disabilities. So from that, it was easy for us to make a list of our priorities to address them. Of course, together with the movement of human rights, with the UNCRPD and the SDGs, those were very important instruments that enable us also to move forward. And when it comes now to authorities, well, when in the process you make authorities understand that it is at least not possible to talk about development if the greater part of persons with disability were left behind. If they do understand, and with evidence, I think Aminata was talking about evidence, because we made a study on that issue of persons with disability access to services, among other things. And it was proven that the situation of persons with disabilities was really very low in some contexts. So if you have those evidence, it becomes very easy to bring people understand your issues, the critical issues you are facing. And I think that was mainly the process we adopted. And once again, we were mainly aware that we need authorities, I mean public authorities, decision makers. We need them. We need civil societies. I mean, we need to build alliances, because we can't alone, as persons with disability, I mean, reach our target without the support of other people that we were aware. And we also need partners, technical and financial partners who can support us. And this is where IBP has been really very important. I mean, the role of IBP has been really very critical, because if we do have ideas, if we know the processes to reach our target, but if we do know all of that and we do not have the resources to implement or even make our dream come true, so it will be really very difficult for us. That's why the support of IBP here is really very important. And in terms of process, you know, when you begin with the local processes, in Senegal, for instance, budget in the local areas start with, the community, with the district or whatever. And we have what we called district government or district chambers or whatever. These are consultative chambers organized around the different component of the society at the grassroots. And we think that if we are involved in those spheres, it's right at the beginning, because it is all the needs of people as a grassroots that are evaluate there, and this set of needs are gathered, and these are what will become later the budget in the local level. And it is almost the same process when it comes to, the macro level in terms of politics or program. One thing to end for this point is that you see, mainly in low-income countries, most of the time, person with disabilities needs are basically diluted into the larger group, and this is not to meet our expectations, in a sense that we have specific needs, and in terms of, for instance, emergency like the pandemic, it's very easy that people forget you because your needs are diluted. And this we very often call, these are kind of residual politics or something like that. And so we need to be heard. We need to be strategic, and this is, in words, the process in which we are implementing our advocacy strategies.
Great, thanks, Musa. I think this is a really great case study of, we always say, to governments to make the pitch that, civil society and groups like yours, networks, that often have more or deeper connections to local communities than governments ever could. And that's the pitch for why governments do need to be more inclusive of groups like yours in whatever process it is, whether it's the budgetary process or the SDGs, the VNR, Voluntary National Review process. I think this is a really great example of why governments need to be more inclusive of civil society groups because of the deep connections that civil society has. And I think building on this, this case study in Senegal is, I think, a great example of where when a government is open and does have the intention or desire to engage with civil society, it's a great example to learn from. But I'm curious about advice that you might have, any of you might have, on for colleagues that work in countries where the government may not be so open. So I think that's particularly the challenge that we are seeing. Again, positive examples are always great to showcase like this, but I think the real challenge that we're going to have in the years to come around SDG 16 are in countries where civic space is shrinking, or in many cases non-existent, in cases where civil society and activists are routinely oppressed or jailed or even killed in some cases. So I'm curious about your reflections on the work that colleagues in these countries can do to still influence in the absence of the entry points that we may have in countries like Senegal. So maybe, Claire, I'll start with you, just from a kind of a global perspective and how IBP approaches this in particularly difficult countries for civil society. What are your approaches? What's your advice for colleagues in some of these countries to still engage, but still also maintain their safety in many cases?
Thanks so much, John. These issues of civic space are critical. We're seeing democratic declines. We're seeing a backsliding in freedom of the press and of citizen assemblies, and so this is an important critical aspect. That said, we work in 120 countries and very diverse contexts, and we've seen that in every region of the world we can find good examples of governments opening up or creating those spaces, perhaps even where we least expect it. So we have an opportunity. I think IBP, we work through a rather constructive approach and a multi-stakeholder approach to try and bring different stakeholders together around this agenda. We work with actors in the private sector or international financial institutions who can help with incentivizing governments to be open as well. We work with governments, as Aminata and Musa have been highlighting, on that evidence base. So again, bringing their own data and presenting it in a way, as well as community feedback and the real experiences of citizens to these fora to bring up that evidence and use it in that cases with governments. And then leveraging the spaces that we do have, whether it's a participatory budgeting process in Eastern Congo, for example, or really seizing on local accountability mechanisms like Shuras in Afghanistan, or there are always local accountability mechanisms, or hopefully there are, that we can leverage and connect with to bring governments around the table to have these discussions with them. So certainly take into account these issues of rights and safety. I think we all need to feel safe as we engage in conversations with government and other stakeholders. We need to bring the evidence and the experience of citizens to these discussions. We need to leverage spaces where we can, and we need partnerships. We need collaboration with a whole range of stakeholders to understand each other and build that trust and advance our common agendas.
Great, thanks a lot, Claire. So Aminata, to you from the Senegalese experience, I mean, a similar question to the question I posed to Claire, but Claire also just mentioned bringing the evidence, bringing the data, the information. It's not just encouraging governments to be more transparent themselves, which is often a challenge, but also how we as civil society actors also bring our own data to the table as well. So I'm curious from your perspective, from the Senegalese experience, and thinking about some of the things that we can learn from this experience. What was your approach in Senegal to first engage or get the government to be more transparent with information, budgetary information or otherwise, and bringing additional evidence to them, whether it's bringing it to the government or the international community, bringing this data. I think sometimes the criticism of data that comes from civil society or non-state actors is that it could be biased potentially. The methodologies may not be as robust as official statistics, and therefore not taken as seriously. But I'm curious, from your experience, how do you overcome those challenges when you're bringing this data and information to the government and others? How do you make sure that they take it seriously? How do you ensure that they still are open to working with civil society? So kind of an all-encompassing question there about how did you approach that work to get the government to be more transparent and to take the data and information that you provide to them also seriously as well?
You're raising a very interesting point. And I think the study that we did on the norms and discourse on disability in Senegal is a great example of how we can bring evidence that the government can't refute. So for that study, we collaborated with the University of Cheikh Anta Diop of Dakar. And so university experts, different well-known researchers. And what we did is that we built a methodology working with the university researchers, and then got the approval of the scientific committee of the University of Dakar, so that we were sure that the government could not use any methodological excuse to say that, oh, this study was biased, or that there were maybe some loopholes. So doing that really was important, because whenever we engage with the government, we realized that first, most of the information that we were giving them, whether it was on education or health or the enrollment of people with disabilities in the employment programs, we realized that they didn't really have that information. And second, the information was presented to them was so rigorous, right? there was no way for them to refute that information, that evidence. And also really, like I said, having a robust methodology, so having a mixed approach, having qualitative evidence, having quantitative evidence, and just trying to play with the different results, right? So whenever we engage with government, depending on how open they were, we would say, oh, okay, so we know that you have this program. We want to, as a civil society organization, we want to accompany you and make sure that people with disabilities are included. And maybe with other government actors that we know are less transparent, we would tell them, okay, so this is what we want for people with disabilities. And if they did not really show any responsiveness, we would go to the media and or even share the evidence with even more influential civil society organizations that can really shift outcomes. So I think not only having evidence, but also really making sure that the evidence is shared with people that can also support that advocacy, right? And going back to that question of political will, I think sometimes we underestimate how much government cares about political support. So it's important to identify the groups that the government really listens to and try to also engage with them. And I think this is, people might say it's not really sustainable that we want the groups that we support to be continuously consulted, but I think it's just a process and we need to consider it as something that will not happen overnight. So not only coalescing, but also engaging with the government and trying to get a sense of where the government's interest is and how we can play with that. So I think there's a lot of strategy that goes into it. And I think that's what IBP Senegal has been quite good at. Yeah.
Great, thanks a lot, Aminata. I think we could unpack all of these experiences in a lot more time if we had a lot more time. But I think one thing that we're looking to do, again, we've talked a little bit about bringing these experiences, up to the global level, and I think again that's a great role that IBP plays, through all of the work of your partners in country. I think one of the things that one of the opportunities that we're engaging around is the high-level political forum on sustainable development, which is the yearly opportunity for us to come together and discuss where we are with the SDGs. This year in particular is the second time that SDG 16 will be reviewed at the HLPF. It was reviewed in 2019 and again this year. And I think one of the challenges or one of the criticisms of the HLPF up to this point is the lack of bringing voices from the national and local level. So I'm curious, just as a way of wrapping up here, when it comes to the HLPF or other international opportunities like this, I'm curious what your messages are that you would bring to the HLPF or that you will bring to the HLPF this year, especially given the context of SDG 16 being reviewed this year, or in the Senegalese context. What's the message that you would send to governments, the UN system, civil society? Where do the priorities need to be for us to, accelerate action towards SDG 16, but also the entire 2030 agenda? Where do the priorities need to be? What are your messages? And if we can, we can try and do it in a tweet size. I think often, governments and civil society, sometimes we have a short attention span. If you could summarize your key message that you would bring to the HLPF this year in a tweet-sized soundbite, what would that be? So maybe I'll start with you, Claire, on your tweet message.
Well, yeah, I'll have to get to the tweet message, but we've just come out with a study of the COVID fiscal management, how transparent and accountable was the fiscal response in 120 countries. And the pandemic is far from over. We have many crises ahead of us and we need to be well prepared. So a tweet message. I mean, we need all hands on deck. We need to open these spaces. We need to get that information out there. We need to spend as promised, and we need to deliver. And these are conversations that need to happen at the country level, at the global level. We need to be working with international financial institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, as we shape these norms at the global level, as well as we give guidance to countries. We need to be on the same page, all the different actors around the table, to understand what we can do, share those good practices, show that there's a good way forward, and work together to implement that agenda. So all hands on deck. We can do it together, and we have the information, we have the skills, and we have the resources to do so.
Great, thanks a lot, Claire. Aminata, your tweet size message for the HLPF.
Claire said it so well. It's hard to come up with something better. But I think I would say, just like Claire said, just making sure that we foster more dialogue. We need the perspectives of everyone, and we need to hear more importantly from the people that we want to protect, the vulnerable groups. We need to hear their voices. We need to understand their experiences with exclusion, with service delivery gaps, with budget exclusion, and we need governments to understand what they gain from hearing more from the voices of the oppressed. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Aminata. And Musa, your tweet size message for the HLPF.
Thank you, Mr. John. Two things. The first is highlight social protection. And the second is how could it be possible that persons with disability take control of their lives? That is the need to be involved in processes, the need to get access to decision-making spheres. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks a lot, Musa. And I think, to be fair, that's not an easy thing to synthesize all of your points into one tweet size message. So to be fair, I'll also bring my own message. I think from our perspective, I think governments need to do better to make more concrete commitments and allocate more budget towards advancing SDG 16 plus, especially in COVID times, where we know, the governments that have had strong institutional responses to the COVID pandemic and coordinated responses have generally done better in pushing back the virus and to serving their people better. So I think, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, more investments need to be made in institution building and to supporting local and grassroots communities to connect governments to these local communities better to ensure that no one is left behind. And a secondary tweet too is also to check out the IBP report on COVID-19 and budgets. We'll provide a link in the description below for you to find out much more information about the work of IBP and about the work of IBP in Senegal. So if you want more information, there's much more to unpack in general about the work of IBP, but also with this Senegalese case study. So you can find more information in the link below. And also a link below to join the TAP network. For those of you that aren't already members or partners of the TAP network, we are always looking for more champions of SDG 16 and of the accountability for the 2030 agenda. So please, for those of you that aren't already part of the TAP membership, you can find a link below to join our diverse and growing membership. So just want to thank each of you once again for taking the time. Again, we could have spent a lot more time to unpacking all of the great work that IBP and your organizations do. But again, thanks to all of you. And we really, of course, look forward to working with IBP much more closely going forward, including around this the SDG 16 plus toolkit that we'll be launching at the HLPF in July. So many more opportunities for us to work together more closely at the global and national level. So thanks again, Claire, Aminata, Musa. Thanks again.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Take care. Great to see you all. Bye.